I'm ready for you.
Well, there are three things I want to say before I read this beautiful introduction that Katherine sent to me.
Fran, could you use the mic? We can't hear you.
Okay. I'd like it to bend forward.
I don't think it's on. There's not a microphone, is it?
There's a blue light. Now is there a microphone?
It's a mic for the camera, but not for that.
Well, I'll shout. How's that? Sue, can you hear me? Good. Okay. There are three things I want to say before I read this beautiful introduction that Katherine sent to me. The first is I want you to notice that Tobias is back with us. I know you especially always love Tobias, so I made a point of bringing him. The second thing that's really important to us is that Katherine did not have a blender incident before she arrived today. And the third thing, I'm a little concerned about it, but I hope that there won't be some kind of deadly health incident. Mary Susan's here, and she has been my doctor in the past, but I should share with you that I'm wearing mascara that is at least 6 months old. And she doesn't exactly explain why I'm supposed to throw it away after 3 months, but this is pretty old mascara that I'm wearing, so I don't know why I'm supposed to get rid of it, but I haven't. So anyway, so that's that. All right, this beautiful introduction of a woman we know well. Raleigh native Katherine Snow Smith has lived throughout the South as a newspaper reporter, magazine editor, public relations executive, and now teacher. After spending much of her career and adult life in St. Petersburg, Florida, she returned to her alma mater, UNC Chapel Hill, to get a master's degree in media and communication in 2022. Katherine graduated in May, defended her thesis in June, and now lives in Raleigh. She will be teaching at Campbell University starting in January and is also instructing community enrichment classes on memoir writing at Wake Tech starting in October. She's a freelancer for Business North Carolina Magazine, Our State, Walter Magazine, and writes content for websites ranging from commercial real estate to health coaches. And as we all know, Katherine is the daughter of A.C. and Nancy Snow and has 3 children ranging in age from 21 to 27. Please join me in welcoming Katherine.
Thank you all so much, and I got to do my first book here, so it's really nice that you are having me back for a second time. And I'll go ahead and say several people have asked about my mom, and you all have just embraced both my parents for so many years, and she is doing well. She is anxious leaving the house. I have offered so many times to obviously bring her to Edenton Street, and she started watching First Baptist on TV during COVID, and she's quite content, but she still ties to Edenton Street. That is clear. And the middle of the year, she always leaves instructions. If I die before the end of the year, I want you to complete my pledge to Edenton Street. And then, not that you all are doing the heavy rush recruiting of me, but so I've moved back to Raleigh, as Fran said, and I've been to various churches. And as much as I love the people here, it's a straight. I got married here. It was a beautiful ceremony. I was very happy. My parents were happy, and it was a good marriage for 17 years. The last 7, not so good. We're still very amicable, and then my sister died, and her service was here, and then my dad died. So Edenton Street, as much as I love the feeling of the people here, when I come in, it's kind of heavy. And it took me a while to realize that. So I've moved to I'm renting a little apartment in Hayes Barton. So I've been joined, but I've been going to Hayes Barton Methodist. And and know a couple people there, but so I'm feeling. So I don't want anyone to think we're deserting Edenton Street. That's still the first and foremost in our minds. So that's the update on her. But she is good and sharp as a tack, still completely walks, lives alone. She has a helper 3 days a week, but just very anxious about. She's very secure at home and does not want to feel insecure somewhere else, which is, you all who knew my mother, she was secure anywhere. But I think you, as we all, you feel, go where you're comfortable. But she is very healthy, and we played Scrabble the other day, and she almost beat me. And I think she may have let me win. So I'm going to read an essay that's a little bit, I guess, about, ironically, after I just said that, embracing or acknowledging your insecurities in life that we all have. This has a little bit of Florida and a little bit of North Carolina, so that's why I picked to read this one. This is, and can everyone hear? I can be louder. Am I good? Okay. And I'll have to do a shout out to Mrs. Schwall, who was my English teacher in 10th grade, so perhaps 11th, you're right. I would have had Smithson, yes. But anyway, she helped me suffer through Faulkner and To Kill a Mockingbird, which is still one of my favorites, of course. Anyway, so perhaps she encouraged me to want to get words down on the page as well. Okay, this is chapter 13, Watch as I Dive In. 6 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, I started swimming several days a week at the nearby public pool. New safety measures dictating one person in every lane made swimming much less stressful than when I'd hit the pool for laps before in years past. Before COVID, we had as many as 4 people in a lane, and on several occasions, I accidentally grazed the bare rib cage of my boss, the newspaper's publisher, who also swam laps with me. My friend Caroline alerted me to the pool's 1 swimmer per lane status when I was lamenting that I was waking up at 5 a.m. in order to take a brisk walk well before the temperature hit 95 and it became necessary to constantly wipe the sweat dripping from my mask. When I try to run these days, my body is like, "Who do you think you are? You're too old for this," Caroline told me. Swimming is easy on the body, but also the ultimate cross training. You totally disconnect. It's how I've kept my sanity during COVID. She was right. In my own lane, underwater, I felt completely free of all the chaos, confusion, and heartache of COVID. No iPhones were underwater, no newscasts, no traumatic grocery store runs, not even a podcast about self-improvement or unsolved mysteries. How ironic that swimming would bring me peace in my 50s when it was the albatross around my neck as a teenager. At age 13, I arrived at Camp Seafarer on the North Carolina coast, barely knowing how to swim a proper stroke. My parents had taken me to swim class as a young child, and I'd spent thousands of happy hours in the pool and in the Atlantic Ocean. But when asked to put in 8 laps for the required swim test on the second day of camp in a foggy lake, I looked more like I was hanging wallpaper underwater than swimming. My fellow cabin mates, as well as most every other camper above the age of 7, easily passed the swim test and wore a white band around their neck to prove it. I was saddled with a black band, so counselors could easily identify me as a drowning risk, as well as someone who couldn't check out a boat without a counselor, go down the giant water slide, or jump from the platform onto the enormous inflated yellow and red blob. The only lower level than black band was red band status, which was designated for girls who started swallowing water as soon as they entered the pool or lake, with no concept of staying in the shallow end. There were a couple red bands in cabins 1 and 2, and a few black bands in cabins 3 to 10. But when cabins 11 through 40 stood up in the mess hall to declare themselves 100% white band, cabin 28 quietly sucked our pudding pops because of the black elastic band hanging around my neck, my albatross. While my cabin mates took diving and water ballet during daily instructional swim each morning, I was in a basic strokes class with a girl from Japan who spoke no English and a girl with developmental delays. We were taught the side stroke by an encouraging counselor with a southern drawl who made it as fun as possible. So today, y'all, we're on a farm and we're going to be picking cherries. You reach down with your left arm for your bucket and reach up for your right arm with the tree. Bring the bucket up, bring the cherries down, and then go back. You just got to keep picking those bright red, shiny cherries off the tree, she explained as she stood on the wooden dock showing us the motions. Of course, our legs were scissor kicking, which we had practiced for 2 days on kickboards before advancing to the arm choreography. I recently found a letter from my father who sent me at the time at camp. Katherine, try not to worry about the swimming levels. Work at it and you will get better. But more importantly, remember you are a person in your own right. At age 13, I'm sure his words buoyed me. In my 50s, I looked up the exact meaning of person in your own right. The phrase means a person is successful or respected because of their own efforts and talents rather than those of the people with whom they are closely connected. Good words of support for anyone at any age. I remember facing my cabin mates during the nightly devotional circle and telling them I was sorry I was holding back our groups 100% at such basic accomplishments. I told them I was picking my cherries the best I could and got them laughing by demonstrating the bucket to waste, cherries to bucket maneuver. 2 weeks into the 4-week session, when I retested for a white band, all of cabin 28 assembled on the grass beside the swim lake, yelling in unison, "Hey, Katherine, pick your cherries. We love you." The moment kind of reminded me of a scene from the movie Officer and a Gentleman, when Richard Gere has some kind of detention doing extra hours of training with Lou Gossett Jr. on a mountain by the water. His love interest, Deborah Winger, and another couple zoom by in a boat and moon him to show them their support. Seal Baldwin, the counselor overseeing the Seafair Swim Lake, certainly wasn't as tough as Lou Gossett Jr., but I think she was just as proud of me when I earned that white band as he was of Gere's character Mayo when he graduated from the Naval Aviation Officer Training. When I retested, I completed the required number of various strokes with better form and no signs of taking on water. Seal was waiting on the lake's dock when I emerged and ceremoniously removed my black band to replace it with a white band. This was a defining moment of my childhood. I overcame a deficit by openly admitting my embarrassment and working hard. Friends and counselors supported me. Decades later, when my daughters were campers at Seafair, I learned that girls were tying knots in the middle of their swim bands to signify if they had a Johnny Seagull at Camp Seagull, the brother camp up the river. Geez, it was a whole new kind of swim band pressure. I didn't worry much about my correct form during my mid-COVID aquatic workouts in St. Petersburg. My goal was simply getting from one side of the pool to the other. But my swimming insecurities resurfaced when I noticed the front desk clerk usually assigned me to the first or second lane right below the lifeguard stand. Were my flailing strokes as much of a telltale sign of my inadequacies as that black band? More than once, I thought I caught the lifeguards exchanging knowing smiles as one took over the other's post. Yeah, now it's your turn to watch that lady. They seemed to commiserate. As much as I tell myself and my kids that age brings an increased immunity to caring what others think, some traces of our insecurities will always linger, like the smell of chlorine in your hair. Thank you. Thank you very much. So no pressure and no quiz. Have y'all read the book? Have most people read the book? Okay. Well, thank you so much for reading the book. So this was a real honor. I spoke last Tuesday at the Ashe County Literary Festival in West Jefferson. That was my first long distance gig. But often when I speak, I then explain the title. But you all, of course, know about how I stepped on the blender. But I did, the way that came to me when I wasn't sure I was going to write a second book. I really was thrilled with the first one, and I felt they've heard enough of me, and that's all the stories I have. And then when I did come back to North Carolina 3 years ago, when my youngest child left St. Petersburg, and he now goes to Denison in Ohio. So I had no children there, and I was divorced, and I was working remotely, and my parents were still at home. And so I thought it's time to just come back to North Carolina. So, and I ended up in Chapel Hill, and it was just so different, as I wrote in the book, being back in Chapel Hill in North Carolina than the last time I was here with my whole life ahead of me. So I started kind of writing some of the experiences and feelings, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll do a second book. So then as I was writing it, I was trying to think of a good title. That's always the fun part. And this had happened. I sprained my ankle putting on Spanx. If anybody here has ever worn Spanx, it's like putting like a metal pipe around you. I mean, they do not give a lot of pull. And so I fell over and twisted my ankle. So that was kind of my working title. And then for the first book, I got a nice review from the Southern Literary Review that said, when this book came across my desk, I thought it was kind of typical Southern chick lit, and which is fine with me. But then she said, but when I read it, it had deeper meaning and deeper observations, and was well written. So then I started thinking, I sprained my ankle putting on Spanx, another kind of little just light. Too light of a phrase. So I thought, well, what could I do? And then I thought about, well, stepping on the blender is a little more graphic. So then I told my oldest daughter, or I told all three of my kids what I was going to call it. And my oldest daughter said, Mom, people are going to think, and then when we shot the cover, and that's the actual Ninja blade that's my real blender. When we shot the cover, I showed it to my kids. And my mom said, Olivia said, it looks like a murder mystery. People are going to think it's a murder mystery. I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. She goes, no, that's good. Maybe more people will buy it. So that's how that title came about. And I would love to take any questions. I also have some more thoughts about writing I can share, but if we want to open it up for any questions now, and if you don't have any, that's fine.
Is there a third book?
I think there is, but it's not me this time. We're all kind of North Carolinians here. The band Liquid Pleasure, the big wedding band. Well, in the book, and when I met that man, Kenny Mann, that founded it, and then I was teaching, and I asked him to come speak to my class because they needed practice interviewing people, and he had the most amazing stories. I mean, he started that band in middle school. Dean Smith's daughter was in the band in 8th grade. And anyway, went on to become one of the top wedding bands in the country. And they traveled Europe. They played with Aretha Franklin. They played at Obama's. And they played at every inauguration since Carter, except for Donald Trump. But they also have played at Mar-a-Lago. And the way Michelle Obama was at Princeton. And he said they played at Princeton, and he remembers this beautiful, he's like, there weren't a lot of black people up there. And he remembered this beautiful student coming up on the front row. And then years later, when he was doing a rally in Chapel Hill, Michelle Obama told the convention team or the preppers, you got to find this band out of Chapel Hill. So then he ended up playing at the inauguration. Anyway, he also was a civil rights leader. His mother marched with Dean Smith's church to integrate Chapel Hill. His father was the chef at the Rathskeller. His great-grandparents were slaves who helped build the university. So I'm writing the story of Liquid Pleasure and his history in Chapel Hill. You think so? I've just started interviewing him, and it's hard to catch him because they play about 5 nights a week. But he's agreed to let me tell the story, and I'm hoping UNC Press might publish it. So I'm working on that. That'll be the next one. And then teaching and freelancing, as Fran said, in between.
How did Dad's body of work influence you?
Thank you for asking that, Mary Susan. I feel very guilty. I didn't read a lot of it growing up. My sister and I just were like, ugh. And then somebody at school would say, your dad wrote about you. And we were like, oh, Daddy. But I think and I did obviously read it as I got older. And I think he just had such a way of observing these little moments in life for those humorous parts or for the poignant parts. And so I'm not near the writer. I mean, he and my mother were both voracious readers. As Mrs. Schwal would tell you, to be a great writer, you have to be a great reader. I do not read as much as them or as vast of selection, but I think Daddy helped me with those observation skills and that recognizing these moments or these little small interactions or big moments. That's what I always, when I can remember something or see something and think, okay, that could be a story.
How will you use that in your course on writing memoirs?
Well, copyright law, which Campbell is as everybody has to be. Well, I'm sorry, this is Wake Tech. I love David Sedaris. I love Nora Ephron. I just reread Why the Caged Bird Sings. Stephen King has a great memoir which talks a lot about, he has a really interesting life. So I was telling the people at Wake Tech, I was like, I want to make copies of all these and and she said, well, we have to abide by copyright laws. But I can't ask the students to buy all these books. Anyway, I was like, well, I got my dad's books, and I think I have full permission from him so I don't want to over-exaggerate the Snows, but I think I will definitely, and I can use excerpts, like passages from those other authors, but for my dad and me, I can use full chapters. So I think I'm we'll be pointing out, go through, find the dialogue, how sometimes just three sentences of dialogue can say as much about a person as this description. And then find the little details that is not just, I fell in a blender. It was, I fell on my Ninja 500 blender. That just makes it more real. But yeah, and just picking up on those little idioms that people say, Daddy was great about that. And I have a chapter in there. And just realizing that kind of everybody has a story. And everybody has something interesting in their life or mundane in their life that is actually relatable to others. Yes.
Well, I love your father's presentation, yes, but your mother could read a dictionary. Have that challenge too. I'm very blessed to.
Yes. We one time years ago, birthday party, I think she was reading, I don't know, Hansel and Gretel or something, and this little boy ran and was like, Ma, his mother was in the kitchen, and he's like, Mama, there's a real witch in there. she got into it. They were a good pairing. Well, Fran asked me to bring a pocketbook, so I still have my little house in St. Petersburg, my little 1924 1,100 square foot bungalow, and I rent that out when I'm up here. So most of my things are still there, but I did somehow dig out in one of the suitcases I still have in my closet. This is a pocketbook. Now, this is not one of the prettiest because this is a 1941 diary that I found at a yard sale or estate sale. But this is how I made them. So picture like a pretty Nancy Drew. The written white checked Better Homes and Gardens. I did a lot of those. The 3-ring binder. So I would drill the holes and then hammer these grommets in and then cut the pages out. And then this is a window shade. And I would glue that for the ribs. And then my friends at my first test audience were like, yeah, but just everything's kind of loose. So then I would order these little things from Oriental Trading, these little zipper compartments. So that's where you would put your money or whatever. And this was nice that it actually had the lock closure. On the other ones, I would put ribbons and you would tie it. But that was always a product defect, is that it was hard to find a way that people felt their stuff wasn't going to just fall out. But that is a pocketbook. Oh, sure. In fact, I was like, that'd be fun to do a craft class. Like everybody bring one of their favorite books. Maybe I should suggest that to Wake Tech. Or we could do it here.
Talk a little bit more. You're teaching at Campbell,
Yes.
and you're teaching at Wake Tech. Now, the Wake Tech class, is that like
It's adult, it's community enrichment. Anybody can do it.
Okay.
So I'm actually,
Which campus are you teaching it at?
that is going to be the Beltline campus, which I'm not sure which one that, and it starts, that's one of the things I'm doing today is I'm posting the link on my social media. But there was a job listing and it was can you teach flower arranging? Can you teach photography? Can you teach TurboTax? And it's community enrichment. And so it'll meet Tuesday night from 6:30 to 9 for 8 weeks. And it's $149. And then the way we've arranged it, I'm hoping that the students will write 7 essays, and I'll edit them once. I won't do like the final edit, but I'll definitely. So at the end of the class, right before the Christmas, everyone will have a collection of 7 stories to staple together and give to their family. And this is kind of what I call, the way I wrote this book, or the first one too, I call it kind of writing for dummies. Each chapter is a separate experience. Fiction I could never write fiction. You have to create these characters and carry the storyline all the way through, and the arc, the denouement. Anyway, but it's very easy to write an experience, and it doesn't have to be it's not the history of your life, it's moments in your life that you feel were interesting or funny or hard or pivotal. So we'll be writing those. So I'll help everybody kind of come up with their list of the 7 experiences they want to share, and then we'll incorporate craft, and I'll help them kind of do an outline for each one, and then they'll write them, and I'll edit that week's and make suggestions, and then we'll do the next one.
I don't remember his name, and perhaps you don't either, but after you complete the book with the guys from Liquid Pleasure, would you be able to get a copy of it and mail it to the date that you had that night?
That would be, yeah, and Fran, I hadn't even thought about that, but look, that shows how good a bad date can turn out. If I end up getting a book published because I happen to be sitting next to this man at 411, yeah, that's a real twist.
Right.
I could dedicate it to him.
But he might remain anonymous.
Anonymous, yes.
I just want to share with you, I think it's really exciting that you're teaching this class, because in 2007, my father had died and my mother had already died some years before that, and I saw that there was a class at NC State. It was writing your memoirs.
What? Okay.
Oh my. And the lady was working on her PhD, so we were real guinea pigs in the class. But it was so enriching, because something that you think, oh, I could tell you this in 5 sentences, but you start writing about it and you can tell it in 4 or 5 paragraphs.
Right.
And then at the end of the class, there were some of us who wanted to continue, and we've still continued today.
And this was 2007?
Yes, but there were like maybe 20, 25 people in the class, but there were like 8 of us who started out, but now there are like 5 of us left. But we still meet monthly.
And read each other's work, or?
Yeah, well, yes, we just share, and we don't particularly critique unless we just have a question.
Right.
But we just share, and it just makes you be accountable for keeping on.
Yeah. Then that's like,
It's a real good feeling.
it forces you to, I want to write these stories down, but it forces you to be somewhere one night a week, and you've got it due. So that's wonderful.
We just meet once a month.
So what have you done with your stories?
Well, they're stacked.
We have some.
Oh, good. They're and your children or grandchildren.
Well,
So
some of them, and I've read some of them to them, but I have so many. But then you find, after a while, I really kind of covered all that growing up thing.
right.
But then, you hit periods in your life that you find you can deal with it a lot better if you write about it.
Exactly.
Just like
It's
my
like
dad
journaling.
had Alzheimer's. In the last 3 years he lived, I could only write about that. And it was just it just gave me comfort.
Comfort to record it
Be able to write it down.
and to acknowledge and validate. It's funny, I walked in the Curtis Center door. I always forget you can't go in the front. Yesterday I ran into Donna Curtis, Don's daughter at Village Deli. And 2 years ago, she gave her dad for Christmas. I mean, I didn't charge or anything. It was the promise that I would help him write his memoirs. And yesterday she goes, my dad is just so busy. And he's like, nobody wants to hear that. And she said, I want it for the foundation, so she saw me and she goes, I'm going to get back on my dad.
I grew up with Don, if you need to know anything.
I would love that. Oh, and everybody, can we go around and just remind me who you all are?
Sellers.
So soon,
I grew
okay.
up in Bessemer City, we went through great school together.
Oh, and what was he like as
First
a
interview.
What was he like as a? Yeah, I'm on the record now. Are you on the record? What was he like as a child?
Well, the first time I met Barbara, she came to my door looking for another house, and she said, I'm Barbara Curtis. I said, oh, you're Don's wife. She said, yes. I said, he was the biggest geek in... She said, he still is.
Oh, that's so sweet, Sue. Yeah, geeks rule.
Speaking of writing your memoirs, are any of you familiar with Storyworth?
Yes.
Yeah, I did that.
Did you do it?
I've
Yeah.
got 2 books.
I'm in the middle of it now.
It's great. I think I'll try it again this winter.
A friend of mine did that with his. They give you a prompt each week. Is it each week?
Yeah. I think it's
Yes, you get a prompt each week.
I did it, but I just used their format because I didn't particularly like the questions they were posing. And so I just decided I want to write about this particular family member, and so I reframed it, but then I was able to, it's published in a book form. And so I think it's a great format if you, for however you want to do it.
Right.
You can use their questions if you want to, and I've known people who've done that and done short things. But to me, I'd never get around to putting it into something. I want Brenda Miller to put hers into something that is publishable and is shareable because she's got incredible stories. And this made me take some stuff and put it in a format that I could keep it as opposed to, but it's a good tool and it's pretty simple, I think, for people to figure out however you want to do
work it, to tailor it to your.
it. Yeah.
Leslie, 3 of my grandchildren gave it to me for my birthday, and they asked the questions.
Oh, well, that's
It's things they love.
Oh, that's really neat.
It's not the format.
That's giving me an idea for the Wake Tech class, and it's going to be. That would be good to say. They come up with 6 of the topics, and then they ask family members to give them the other 2 essay topics. I like that.
There's a wonderful story today in the News and Observer. For those of you who might take it online or hard copy, it's about a man named Ford Worthy who turned 100 years old yesterday, and I was at his birthday party. He's a neighbor of mine, and he is the dearest man. And talk about a storyteller. He is a wonderful storyteller, and this particular article is about where is Chester. It's a remarkable story. It started in World War II, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing.
Oh, I'm glad you told me. I know his son Ford.
You know, Ford.
Yeah, and his wife is
MC
Allison.
Yesterday at the party. And
Oh.
Ford is the one who did the research on finding whatever ever happened
To Chester.
But you have to know who Chester is first, though. You got to read the article. It's fun.
I agree.
Oh, I'm so glad I remember he had his 99th, and now it's 700.
So, he had a 99th birthday party, a great, big, huge party his family gave him, because he said, I'm hedging my bets. I want to get the party. So, he turned 100 yesterday, and he had another big party, and it was just as much fun.
Oh.
It was so much fun. So.
Yeah, actually, a little North Carolinaism. So in the Dean Dome, banners hang of the players, the top players. So there happens to be Phil Ford and James Worthy's banners are side by side. So in these huge Carolina blue letters, it says Ford Worthy. So Ford said younger Ford, when they used to take their kids to the Dean Dome, he'd be like, yeah, that's for me because I went to Carolina. Like, that's a story. Well, thank you all so much. Oh, no, we can keep going.
You wrote about your dad in this book. Mm-hmm. How hard was that?
You know, it was hard to feel like I was almost celebrating him too much. Like in journalism, you have to say if you have a conflict, or a bias, and I clearly had a bias. So it's hard to write it without sounding too much just like the adoring daughter. But again, a lot of people had great relationships with their mother or father, and he taught me a lot, and I showed some of his flaws. It was similar to a lot of that was in his eulogy that I did. But it was, I cried a lot, but it was kind of my ode to him. So it was, and there were stories I've heard many times. Yes.
I am Peggy Duke, and I'm Brenda Miller's sister. That's just.
I can tell. Okay.
I am. But I worked at the News and Observer, and I knew your dad.
Oh, you did?
I was secretary for Jonathan Daniels, the editor.
He really liked Jonathan.
Yes, and so did I. He was quite a character. And I used to do his research for him on writing books. And I would be in the library going through the microfiche. Does anybody even know what that is?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Looking for something that he wanted to put in his book, that Jonathan wanted to put in his book. So that was one of the best experiences I've ever.
Wow.
So I
Wow.
would see your dad all the time because I sat at a reception type desk right beside the elevator, and he would kind of shuffle on by, and I would see Herb O'Keefe. And
They loved Herb.
And it was wonderful. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Daddy liked when, as newspaper people get, a lot of hate mail. And Jonathan Daniels, I guess, was famous for somebody was like, oh, you've done this or you've said this. And Jonathan would put a piece of paper in his typewriter and just like, you may be right. I guess his standard response was, you may be right, Jonathan Daniels. Like he didn't argue with them. He didn't defend himself. He's just, anyway.
When I went on my interview for the job, and his first comment was, I'm the biggest son of a bitch in North Carolina.
No.
And I was 19, 20, whatever.
Wow.
And I said, and I bet you enjoyed every minute of it.
Look at you! And he said, you're hired. And how long did you work with him?
8 years.
Oh my gosh.
It was quite an experience.
Wow. And was he?
Nothing like a newspaper atmosphere.
Yeah, and I have that essay, and I loved that building. I'll be so sad to drive by when it's gone. I mean, now it's, I guess, empty.
It is now. How is a newspaper operation different now?
Well, I mean, it was different before, but then now with COVID. So I very much miss being at the St. Pete Times, but that newsroom doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, because everybody's working remotely, and maybe they come in the office one day a week. But and just the small, whether you agreed to, I mean, so many people didn't like the News Observer, but you took it and you read it and you argued, and it was, and the Raleigh Times.
That's right.
But it was again, I think that's a growth. I mean, it kind of was this common tie that everybody took the paper, and everybody, whether it was a feature or a harder hitting story, it kind of brought a community together, not necessarily that they agreed, but they had this shared source of entertainment and news. And now everything's so fragmented with news which is good. I mean, news from all different. But yeah, I think that newsroom experience was also a community experience. And I don't think that. Now, David Warnoff, who is the Daniels nephew, he runs the Southern Pines Pilot. And that's one of the beacons of journalism. It's profitable. It's 3 days a week. They're growing, and it's because they cover the local news that you can't get from MSNBC or.
I've heard so many people that are native Raleigh people who've been here for a while just say it's not paper anymore. It's because they don't cover weddings. They do obituaries still.
But you have to pay for them.
Yeah. So it's it's a very different, nothing social. I know those of you who've been in Raleigh a long time know there's something that's rather anachronistic called the debutante ball. Well, it used to be, goodness gracious, all over the papers, and not a peep. Somebody, Luana, brought me a program from, she was an usher at the ball, and she brought me a program. And I looked at it and I said, goodness gracious, takes me back about 60 years, you know. It's too bad we're losing some of that, you know.
So, yeah.
If we could preserve it in a good way, that would be wonderful. But we
It's
can't.
just not the same reading it online as it is holding
Holding it, right,
Not
right.
the same way about a book.
Encircling it, right.
Well, this might seem like digressing, but I used to enjoy calling up when I'd go on vacation or out of town, and this gracious lady would answer the phone at the News and Observer or the Raleigh Times and take down notes of everything, and it was always handled beautifully.
Her name was Maxine.
Oh, she was so
Oh, wow.
It was great, and now, one reason I quit the newspaper is they outsourced, so I was around the world.
Yes, you can.
They had no conception of why I was mad that my newspaper wasn't there in the morning, what a sidewalk was, what a I was so angry, so angry.
It's kind of the,
And I looked
that's
forward to
McClatchy,
it.
yeah.
I would beat them up if I didn't
get my paper.
in the morning.
Well, you probably, remind me your name again?
Peggy.
Peggy. So did you know Ike Schwartz, the ad man?
yes.
So that was my dad's story, that somebody called up and complained that their ad was wrong and they wanted to talk to Ike Schwartz, and his secretary said, well, he's not here today. This is Yom Kippur. And the caller said, well, Yom, you're just going to have to help me figure out this ad. And so that was a real story. That was Ike Schwartz. David and I are good friends, and on Yom Kippur every year we text each other. One or the other will be like, "Hope your ads are straight," and Yom doesn't have to come in from services to help you.
That reminds me of a story when I was covering the legislature. They were making Yom Kippur a state holiday, which is, it's just a holiday, but you don't have to have time off or whatever.
To go to.
And a guy got up and wanted to know if Mr. Kippur was a Democrat or.
Okay, I need to write a third book. And what year was that?
Gosh, it was probably in the 80s.
And who were you working for?
WBT.
WBT. Wow. Like, why is this?
I would love to share also, like I say, that it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. And I'll never forget November 22nd, 1963. Because it came over, they had a United Press and Associated Press room that you would go into, and Mrs. Daniels would always go in there a couple of times and pull off,
The wire, the papers.
And so I think I might have been one of the first ones to know about John F. Kennedy being shot. And I have a copy of the editorial that he wrote.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was part of who I am.
Part of, yeah.
And I'm also an artist, and I can do artwork for my sister's book.
There you go.
It sounds to me, Peggy, like you've got enough stories that you can
Yeah, there you go. Yes, definitely.
Maybe. Well, I'd rather paint.
Oh, how beautiful. No. I'd rather paint too. I just can't.
So, what do you find in terms of, we're all kind of a certain age, and we remember newspapers, the old, and so forth. What do you find with the students that you are teaching now? How is the way you were educated in journalism and what they want to know, or I'd be curious.
And I was questioning that too. So the class that I was taught by Jim Shoemaker. The shoe comic strip was based on, and it's still basically the same syllabus. You have to write 2 stories a week, and most of these kids have never read a newspaper. But we taught. You teach good old-fashioned who, what, when, where, why, or the anecdotal lead. But then there would be 2 days out of the whole semester where I would teach for online writing. And I wrote for this website called The Penny Hoarder quite a bit. And it's all bullet items, and it's more clickbait headlines, and it's short, punchy, which actually a traditional news story is kind of short and punchy, but is not in the bullet items and the subheads. But this phrase that's going around, and then when I got my master's, it's really storytelling is very much a phrase used in journalism. So I think it's getting to make yourself stand out or to make your story read, you need to have personality. You need to tell people's stories. It's not just the facts. So they were ready to embrace interviews and going on the scene and describing. I mean, they had to pass this class, but they had to make a C or better. But when we would get the first day, they didn't know an editorial from a column, from a news story, from a feature, but we talked about all that. And I wouldn't even say half of them would pick up a copy of the Daily Tar Heel, which is free on their way to class. But I think they know you need to be a good writer, whether you go into finance or even medicine. Nonprofit, construction, you've got to be able to communicate with other people. So they worked. I was very nervous. They weren't going to come to class, and I bet each semester I had one slack student each. I only taught for a year. One slack student, and the others were there on time. And I don't care if they had dreadlocks or tattoos or a headdress or a sorority sweatshirt. They were so courteous and polite and respectful, and 90% did their work. I was really impressed. Now, however, I will also say, and cover your ears, Mrs. Schwal, a third of each class did not know how to use quotation marks and a comma and attribution. They would say things like, "I'm going to the store, period, said Nancy." Or, "I'm going to the store, said Nancy," with a quote. I went online and found like 5th grade or 4th grade worksheets. And I finally printed them out for one student, and I said, "This is not, I don't mean to insult you by giving you a 5th grade worksheet." I said, "You just weren't taught this, and nobody along the way," and they got into Carolina, fixed it. I don't know.
Scary.
And then one student who was really bright, she goes, "Well, I did a lot more creative writing than news writing." I'm like, well, same rules apply. Yeah.
You think someone else wrote their essays together?
I wonder. Or they have these essay coaches. It was unsettling.
They also don't use grammar and spell check, too.
Yeah, right.
So, but they could write without using like.
Well, and some put that in there. We even discussed that and that's kind of more write like you talk. That's kind of the thing for journalism. Used to, you cleaned up what they were supposed to say, and now it drives me crazy. All of my children say me and David went to the store. They do, and I have taught, and I'm just don't say it in front of Mimi and Snow Daddy. But I have told them, start that sentence over, and they're just like, "Mom, nobody cares."
You know what worries me is when I hear people our age, it's like they forgot the English grammar they were taught.
Because
I
it's
hear sometimes. Using the objective case when you ought to use the nominative case, and it just.
But then you can get back to, we don't use the King's English. Who's to say that you're not smart if you say me and Sarah went to church? Just because that's how we talked, does everybody else have to talk that way?
But ending sentences in "at" does not.
I had.
Apparently that's changed.
That's changed.
But where is it? You don't have to say
where is it at?
Yeah. You don't have to say lay.
So, and I don't want
to be Nancy.
That was my. So, and I don't want to. We could talk forever, but my first front page story at the St. Pete Times. my parents were there for Christmas, and my ex-husband's parents had given Olivia the Sleep and Snore Ernie, which was the toy of the year. And Ernie from Sesame Street in his striped pajamas was trying to encourage children to sleep or take their nap. And he'd say, "Oh, I'm sleepy." And then the next thing he'd say, "It feels good to lay down." Oh. This is Mattel and Sesame Street, and it's Christmas morning in my house, and my parents went ballistic. So I went into the paper, and I said, this could be kind of a fun, we had something called Column 1, which you'd always have the Wall Street Journal did it, kind of like a fun feature. I said, this could be a Column 1 on the must-have toy. So I actually got to interview somebody with Sesame Street, and they said, well, Cookie Monster says me like cookies. We're not teaching grammar. I'm like, but you are. Yeah. And then I tried to get, what was this, the guy that was just, I can't think,
Jim Henson?
No, like a journalist that was just the expert on language. I can't think of his name. Anyway, I tried to get him, didn't get him. So they're like, you need like a language expert. And I called Mrs. Silver hair from Broughton.
Oh.
Peacock?
Mid-peak.
Not Peacock.
Hey, Miss Penny.
No, not Miss Penny. Gosh. Timothy. Mary and Timothy. So here I was in St. Petersburg, but I called Mary and Timothy, and she had and it was what we call the kicker. It was the last line of the story. And she said, it's just a domino effect. First, you're misusing lie and lay. Next thing you know, everyone's going to be dangling their participles. Anyway, but that was my first front page story, was thanks to my parents. Well, you all have been wonderful, and I thank you so much. And if anybody wants their book signed, I'd love to do that. But I just thank you so much for having me back, and maybe we'll get Kenny Mann and Liquid Pleasure in here next time.
That would be good.
Thank you. And would everybody just go around and say who you are so I can tell my mom?
Well, Leslie Coleman.
Brenda Summers.
Sue Sellers.
Martha Tyson.
Bonnie Shackelford.
And I'm just a visitor with Bonnie.
Well, you're welcome, Will.
Ellen Klein.
I'm Peggy Duke.
Helen Schwab.
Martha Cooper.
Janie Kirkby and Pat Reed.
Jane Van Grafflin.
Brenda Miller.
Beth Norris.
Linda Hicks.
Mary Higgins.
Ann Van.
Fran Preston.
Why don't we quickly make a copy of that list?
Oh, I
Be
just take a
signed.
picture with my phone.
Yeah.
And not like she's,
But the video is available for your mother too.
Oh, well, that would be really special since we
Yeah.
talked about
And then our
her.
names, I think he's still recording, so that will all be.
Thank you all so